Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are going to be making some security cameras. So we're going to be setting up so we've got multiple cameras around and that we have a central sort of terminal that we're able to actually monitor them from. So this is going to be in terms of sort of stuff that's already there and set up using custom first person character controller, and I've already built a few pieces for the level. So let's take a look. So what I've already got set up is a very basic security camera model. And these have been very specifically constructed. So we have this pivot point here, where that pivot point, if we go to a particular security camera, so it's been designed that these can easily rotate and that we can also pitch the camera, not roll the camera, pitch is on the Z in this case, we can pitch the camera up and down. So we've got something that is got full degree of motion in it, and so we've got these set up in multiple locations. So there's multiple of these, and we'll have them linked to this security console. So what we want to be able to do then from the security console is flip through the different images. So there's going to be a few things that we need to get set up with this. So script-wise, because this is a lot of cameras, they're going to need to be going to a render to texture. We don't want those render textures being captured all of the time. So there's going to be a few things we do there to ensure that we're not sort of capturing it continually. So our scripts, then we're going to have a security camera script. And the idea with this is a console is going to link to specific security cameras. So it's not going to be a case that a security camera is linked to everything. It'll be specifically just particular ones it gets linked to. And then we will have security console. All right, so with that, we can start to get a couple of these bits set up. I will attach these scripts on. So, because we've already got a few of the bits, so we'll have our security camera, and then the console will get the security console script. Okay, so first thing, our security console needs to know what cameras it's actually talking to. So, going to have a serialized field and a set of tracked cameras. So, a list security camera linked cameras, and we'll have also keeping then track of the current active camera. So public int active camera index. And we'll do the usual setup for that, but setting it to -1. And then we can also set up a active camera one. But what that will do is if active camera index is less than 0, then it's null. Otherwise, we return the one from there. Just makes an easy way for being able to keep track of that. So that's good. That gives us a mechanism for that. So it means in our security console here, I'm going to link up all of these cameras to it. So now it is aware of what cameras are available. Now the cameras themselves, I want them to be panning around. So I'm going to set up some basic logic for having them move as well. So if we go to our security camera, what I want to have is serialized field, and we're going to have a default pitch, which I think, looking at these, if I pick that one, probably a default pitch something like, yeah, 20 degrees feels about right. It's going to depend on each one. We'll go for 20. And then we want to be able to control the angle range that it sweeps across. So angle swept. And it's going to depend camera to camera. But let's start off with a default of 60. So the idea is going to be that the cameras will sweep one way and then sweep the other way. That's sort of what we're going for with this. So, okay, let's get these. Then we also want that sort of sweep rate or the sweep speed. So sweep speed. So if we think 60 degrees is a full arc. So if we rotated at a speed of 6, that would mean it would take 10 seconds. So I think that's probably reasonable. That feels about sort of right. So we'll go for 6 as the sweep speed. That means we're going to also need to keep track of the current angle, which will default it to 0. And we'll have a sweep forward, for want of a better. Actually, let's go for, we'll call it sweep. Probably clockwise is actually a better term for it. So sweep clockwise will be true. So what that means is we need to update our current angle. So that's going to be the first thing we do. So current angle, we are going to add to it sweep speed multiplied by time.delta time multiplied by, if we are sweeping clockwise, then by 1, otherwise by -1. So we update the angle. And then I want to handle if we need to wrap back. So that's what I'm going to then do next. So if current angle is greater, so this angle swept will be the total angle, so either side. So if it is greater than that sort of half angle swept, so we'll say angle swept times by 0.5. So if it is greater than or equal to that, then, well, first thing we want to do is sweep clockwise. We swap the value of that, so we toggle that. We also want to have this wrap. So what I'm going to say then is our current angle minus equals angle swept times by 0.5. So this way if we get, and it's worked out that our current angle is actually now 61 degrees, so sorry, 31 degrees, that would actually end up moving back. That would not be the right amount to move back by, because we would want it actually to go more like to 29, or we could have it just fully go to it. Part of the reason I'm thinking here is whether and it does change the behavior slightly. Now, the timing of it, you're not likely to notice. It's a question of whether it moves to the end and any overlap comes back. I think actually what I will do is I think it's going to work best if we go F, math F, absolute, current angle is greater than or equal to angle swept. Then what we do is sweep clockwise. We just invert that. That way then it might go a tiny amount over, but not a huge amount. So I think that will work best. It's probably, I would at times normally do a little bit of a carryover, but I think in this case, the difference is going to be so slight, people are probably not going to notice it. So having it do this, I think will be fine. Might mean it slightly overshoots it, but that's okay. we need access to serialize field, transform, pivot point, because then what we will do, position the, or rotate the camera, so transform dot rotation, so dot rotation is equal to, now we probably could actually get away with just setting the Euler angles. So normally I would use quaternions for this, but I think we probably can get away with just setting the Euler angles. So we won't have anything in X, Y is our default pitch, and then we have current angle. So let's just see how that looks. Make sure these cameras are all rotating at a speed that feels reasonable. Because that's the thing, we don't want them to be, I'm going to move the game view down here for now. So we haven't linked up the pivot, so that's something we do need to make sure of. So the security camera, we open that up and we will link its pivot up. Make sure that's saved, and we need to make sure this is changing the pivot point dot transform. Otherwise it's going to move the cameras into a very odd position. So what we're expecting now, so we can see they aren't quite rotating the way we would have expected them to. So we can see the Z value is changing. So that's, we've actually gotten these. That should be current angle. That should be the pitch. Got them around the wrong way. Very easy to have happen. So now if we test this, that looks better. So it is sort of sweeping, but what we can notice, so that should be sweeping either side like that. It's what we would be expecting to see happen with it. So if I reset that back to 0, what we likely want to do, that actually should be the local Euler angles, because we do have these placed and rotated differently, we want it to be rotating that relative to the parent. So then with that, these cameras are slowly sweeping around. They look back. So that looks pretty good. So we can start then setting up for these being able to actually start capturing stuff. So these are going to also need serialize field, camera, linked camera, because these cameras, we want to connect them to a render texture. But that render texture, we want to be setting that up ourselves. So what that's going to mean is we are also going to then need to have here a render texture, target texture, and I will actually make this so output texture, and we'll do the usual setup there, because I do want the security console to easily be able to access this. So we need to configure the camera for linking to this render texture. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure this camera actually starts off by default, which it already is, but I'm going to modify the prefab and turn this back on, and then we're going to turn this off in code. So I'll close Unity Hub. So a couple of things I want to then do. So linked camera dot enabled is false. Turn the camera off by default. set up the render texture. Okay, so we need to set up the render texture. So with doing that, our output texture, it's a new render texture. So one of the things we need to be able to give it is the size. So I'm going to set up here, serialize field, int, output texture size. We're just going to go for 256 to start with. Keep it not too large a size. So the output texture size, that covers the width and height. Then we have, in terms of what we're providing for the depth buffer, we've got a lot of different ways of how we can actually configure this stuff. In terms of we can be providing it as one of these graphics formats. So there's a few different ways that we can actually work with this, depending upon sort of what we're wanting to use. What we can also do is if we just create a quick little render texture, you can see the format that it's using there. So it's got a few different ones. So it's using 32 there. So we can get rid of that and we can chuck in 32. So that'll give us the render texture. We can link that to the camera. So we can say linked camera, the texture, so the target texture is that. So that's good. So we've got the render texture set up. So that means that when I link up the stuff for the security camera here, because we do need to tell it the particular camera that it's talking to, what we'll notice is we should then see, now it won't be populated, but we expect to see this camera turn off. The other thing we'll also do with these security cameras is I'm going to actually turn off their audio listener. That is something where we could be doing something fancy with that. Serialize field, audio listener, camera, audio. So I am going to turn that off. I am not going to actually remove it. Because you might at a later point want to do something where we do actually use the audio from the camera and relay that through. That could be quite an interesting thing, in particular for something like a stealth game. But what I'm expecting to see is render texture gets populated and the camera and audio listeners get turned off, which they have been. And we do have that render texture, and the render texture is currently blank, which it should be. We expect it to be blank at the moment. So that's good. So I want to now get set up so I can, because I've got, if I run it, I can actually see I have my security console here. So I want to be able to have it that I can interact with that security console. So if I head over to it and select this, then what I'm going to do is under this, I'm going to create a canvas and we'll set this to be world space. We will keep the raycaster on it, and I'm going to just set up a panel which will make dark color. And then we're just going to need to position this. So because the image is square, I am going to make this also square. So you can see where that is currently positioned. So we need to adjust the scale of this pretty significantly. 0.01. Let's check another 0 in there. And I'm just going to move this out so we can sort of see. So getting a sense of sizing in that for it, we can probably double that. It's going to be pretty close. Now we will need to have this on a bit of an incline, so that's okay. You can just tilt it. We kind of need to tilt it a little bit by eye. That looks pretty good. So it does go into the sides a little bit. If we raise this up, that's looking pretty good. This will give it a fairly dark backing as well, which I think will work quite good. So that looks good. We've got the setup there for the UI. Panel is all good to go. So we want to be able to then, within this, have, and this is going to be a raw image, because then we can easily swap in different textures. So call that camera image. And then I want to be able to be raycasting into that. So that's going to be something I'll be setting up as well with this. I want that to largely fill the screen. Now the UI we can see with how that filled in, this needs to be flipped around. Not unusual for that to be the case. Means our rotation there also flips. Bring this up a little bit. That looks good. So camera image, we might up that padding so it's a little bit of a better fit. Probably 4, 3. Okay, I think if we go for 5 on all sides, we'll be fine. Means it's going to be losing a little bit on the side, but that's okay. So security console is going to need to know about that image as well. So it's going to need a using unityengine.ui. So it'll have a serialize field, raw image, camera image. We're also going to have a function for when we have activated it. So public void on clicked, and we'll just display a message clicked for now. It's all do to start with, is just indicating that. So what I want to then do, if I go to the prefab, so this I want to make sure, and I'm only going to apply selective sections of this in the prefab. I don't want to apply the Pro Builder ones, just because that can result in issues. So that looks good. I can then open up that prefab, and we've got everything set up there, which is great. Security console, I can link that to the camera image. And the camera image, I want to be able to get click events. So I can add in an event trigger, add in a new event type. So we can say pointer click, and we can then tell it that's going to link to a security console on clicked. So we could get further info, so we could actually change this to extra info if we needed. We don't really need that extra info. As long as we're getting that click notification, that's the main thing. So let's test this out. Let's see if we get our clicked message. And we do. We can see that coming up on the console. So that's great. So what this is going to do is this is going to select next camera. So I'll have that as a void function. Select next camera. What I can do with that is active camera index is equal to active camera index plus 1 modulus with the number of cameras. This has a couple of advantages. If we had no camera selected, that goes from being -1 to 0, so it picks the first camera. For everything else, it will automatically wrap around. So it gives us an easy way of having that wrap, which is really handy. Switch to the next camera. What I will also then do is var previous camera is equal to active camera, because then f previous camera is not equal to null. Previous camera, stop watching. So we're just going to say that we are no longer watching it. And I'm going to provide the game object through, actually no, I'll provide just the security console. Tell the previous camera to stop watching. Tell the new camera to start watching. What this is going to allow us to do, apart from the efficiency gain of we're not doing render to textures when we don't need to, it also means that you could have different consoles linked to different cameras, but some of them overlapping, and have that still actually functionally work, which is good. So we'll do active camera, start watching, divide this. We then need to update the texture there. So what we'll do is camera image dot texture is equal to active camera output texture. So that looks good. So we can then set up our start and stop watching functions. So we'll have public void start watching. Security console, linked console. Same thing for stop watching. And then what we'll do is we will have a list of security consoles currently watching consoles, and we'll just populate that. So then when we start watching, we go add linked console, if it doesn't already contain it. So if that contains, so if it doesn't contain it, then we add it. Otherwise, when we're done, currently watching consoles, we remove the linked one. And then we can just update the controls here. So on watches changed, because we might do further stuff at a later point. So I think this is something where I would want to have this in a centralized function. So on watches changed, then linked camera dot enabled is equal to whether currently watching consoles count is greater than 0. So it just gives us an easy way of turning that off and on. So we can store that list here. So let's test this out. Let's run this up and see what happens when we go and use the console. So initially, nothing's shown. It's what we'd expect. We activate it. We can see from one of the cameras, and that's changing. And as we switch different cameras, we can see different stuff there. Now, there was a little bit of a delay with that first one, so I do want to just check and see if there was actually an issue happening there or not. So go over. Okay, so it might have been that I had the cursor up and I just needed to click into the area. So that looks cool. But there's more bits that we can be doing there. So a couple of other things that I want to be doing with this to improve it. So the security cameras themselves, I'm actually going to, just because there is a brief moment and it also makes the editor a bit messy, because if you notice with the game view in the editor, it was showing us the view from the console, the camera by default, so we don't really want that. So the other thing I want to then set up is, well, we've got our cameras here, I would like to be able to have the cameras have sort of a name, so we can be showing that on the console as well. So we can have a serialized field, string, display name. That way we can have appropriate names that get monitored and shown in the setup there. So that will be cool. That will work out. The other stuff we could potentially do is synchronize some of these settings in terms of, okay, because we can see we can change these to different things. Controlling what the actual setting there is to match with what the game is something we could do. That's also something where we could just modify it on the particular prefab. I'm not sure necessarily which one I would want to go for. I feel like having it be something where we sync it to the main one does actually feel like it makes most sense to me. So I think this would be where I would go for something like linked camera. And we can see those settings. So that's the clear flags. So clear flags can go for camera, main, clear flags. So then linked camera, and we want that background. So camera.main.background color, and I'll put in an option where it can sync to the main one. So serialized field will sync to main camera config. Just so that is something that it can do that by default, but we can easily turn it off if we're wanting to control it just directly on the prefab or per camera. Makes it easy. I'm also going to the display name here. This could be something where we want to be able to get that from the console. So as well as that name here, I'm going to link it like that. So I can have a public string display name that maps to that. Just going to make it a little bit cleaner and easier for retrieving and working with that. So that's good. That's the updates on the camera side there. The other stuff we could do is we could set up some stuff for post-processing. So if I set up a security camera layer, and what I'll do is I would just put the security cameras in that layer, and we can add in post-process layer, and we are going to tell it that it is only looking for things in that security camera setup. That will allow us to create post-processing that will only apply to those security cameras. So I'm going to set up a post-process volume, and this is going to be security camera PPV, and it will be global, and we change its layer to security camera. We also set up our profile for it, so that will allow us to adjust and mess with that while it's actually running. Initially, I'm just going to chuck in a little bit of, have the vignette one there, and then we can mess with that while it's actually running. Now our security console, we wanted to have this have display name for the image. So we're going to add in Text Mesh Pro. So we'll just import that. And that'll allow us just to overlay a little bit of text on it that says what camera is being shown. So we'll just turn off gizmos to make this a little bit easier to see. Default color needs to change so we can get a sense of active camera. Name goes here. So I'm going to align that, I think up the top would work nicely. Update our positioning of everything. -5. That looks all right. Probably give this a little bit more spacing. on the left and right. Might go for 20 on the left and 20 on the right. That also works with that. I think lower, there we go. Yeah, that alignment looks good. I might lower that a little bit further again. Okay, so we can say active camera. Okay, so we've got that text there. I think naming wise, that'll give enough space for it. So we can then set that up so we have the ability to edit that text. So if we bring in Text Mesh Pro, serialize field, Text Mesh Pro UGUI, active camera label. What we would do at the very start is active camera label, camera none. And then when we change camera, active camera label, that becomes equal to camera. And we can just grab active camera, display name. Just adds a little bit to it, so it's showing it there. You could add things like a little recording indicator, stuff like that. A little bit of a red dot there would be cool also. So it's active camera label. And we'll just link that up. And again, update our prefab. And again, just updating the bits other than the Pro Builder mesh. So what this will mean, it will have its proper indicator. So if we take a look, so it hasn't actually updated the text there. So if we take a look at the security console, it should have updated the text. It's got the active camera label. So let's just try that again, make sure it's running with the correct things and make sure it is properly linked up, which it is. So we'll just have that selected. Oh, whoops. Not text. Just autocomplete. So I can run this. It's currently saying there is no camera. Click on it. Well, those don't have their names, so let's give each of these a name. So we've got this one here. Let's call this Corridor 1. Call this one, let's say that's the canteen. This can be canteen hallway. This one can be corridor 1, because I don't think we've used, nope, we have already used corridor 1. This can be corridor 2, and then we will have finally, that's actually all of them. So we've got then that original one there, which we'll call entry. So this will be able to cycle between the cameras, which would be cool. Let's go entry, corridor 1. So that's pretty good. Let's test out with the post-processing effects because we haven't tried to configure those yet. So let's adjust check if the vignetting is working, and we can see that that is. So now that we know post-processing is applying, now we can go to town. So let's chuck on some grain. We can have the intensity of that. We'll adjust that. So that's pretty high. That looks quite good though. So it gives us a little bit of our security camera-ish sort of look. We could also add in, if we wanted, a little bit of lens distortion. So intensity-wise, because with this you can get sort of your little bit of a fisheye effect. So we could do a lot to just a little tiny bit. Other effect-wise, I don't know if there's any other ones we'd probably want to add in. We could do stuff like some stuff for color grading it, for tinting it if we wanted. We could add in depth of field options there as well. But that, I'm pretty happy with how that looks. That has definitely saved. So that's good. We've got our security cameras working. We can toggle between them. I kind of like the security console after a period of, if it hasn't been active engaged with for a bit, it actually just auto switching. So I'm going to have some options for that. Full auto switch enabled is false by default. Then, so serialized field, auto switch interval, maybe every 15 seconds. And then we want to keep track of sort of the inactivity time. Auto switch start time. So we'll say if we haven't used it for, I think again, the 15, I might go for 10 seconds in this case. Yeah, go for 10 seconds. So what we want to be checking is, well, if auto switch is enabled, then, okay, well, we need to keep track of when we were last sort of active, or how long it's, that sort of cooldown on being, for it going to that inactive sort of thing. So we'll have a float time until next auto switch. So if auto switch is enabled, then time until next auto switch minus time to delta time. F, that is less than 0, then we reset it to the auto switch interval. And switch. So actually doing the switching is pretty straightforward, because we can just go select next camera and we know that that will work. So that looks good. The other thing we then do is, if the user has actually clicked on it, so this will only be in the case of clicking on it, then what we do is F auto switch enable, then the time here is going to be that start time. So what that will do is every time we click it, that's going to kind of reset that. So I'm going to actually turn that on by default. And what we should notice is then when we run it, it's going to just go and it'll have switched. Now, if I ignore it, then after a short time, we should see it change from the entry to the very next one. And we did. So if I interact with it though, which I can still do, so it's now in the hallway, it will now not switch for another 10 seconds. So that means we've got something where it's going to be auto switching, and we saw it did, but as long as I'm switching between them, it's not going to do that because it'll be resetting it every time. So we've got security cameras fully set up and running. We can add in multiple cameras. Those cameras can have a name. The cameras are only active when a security console is actually monitoring them. And we've made it so that we've got some custom post-processing there, but it's only applying to those security cameras. And so that makes it really handy. We've got all sort of the bits of setup that we need there for it. There are further things we could add to this. Like I said, we could do stuff where we're transferring audio. That could be an interesting thing to be doing if you did want to have some audio coming through them. But the key thing is we've got these up and running. Thanks, folks. I hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. It really helps out. Really appreciated. If you've got any questions, chuck in a comment below. If you're looking for the code for the project, that code is available up on GitHub. And as always with these projects, you can use that code in any of your own, whether those are commercial or non-commercial. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon set up, and you'll find a link to that in the description below as well. But until next time, bye.